wind down his chest in front of 200 guests. 9-year-old Ethan Carter stepped in front of his father seconds earlier, refusing to let the humiliation go unanswered. Daniel Carter said nothing. He simply took his son's hand and turned toward the exit. But Daniel held the one signature that could either save thousands of jobs or destroy them. Within the hour, he would have to choose between his son's dignity and everyone else's livelihood. If stories like this one pull you in from the very first line, go ahead and hit subscribe. Before we continue, it genuinely helps this channel keep telling stories worth staying for. The Meridian Grand Ballroom had been transformed into something closer to a royal celebration than a corporate dinner. Crystal chandeliers bathed 200 guests in warm golden light, while giant screens displayed the rotating Novatech Dynamics logo above a countdown that simply read, "Tonight." Everyone knew why they were there. Novatech was drowning in debt after a corporate governance scandal that had already forced 2 board members to resign. The only thing standing between the company and bankruptcy was one investor's signature, belonging to someone almost nobody in the room had ever seen. Reporters from 3 financial publications had been invited under strict instructions to photograph only the stage and signing table, never the guest list. Daniel Carter moved quietly through the crowd, never seeking attention. More than a decade earlier, he had founded Carter Meridian Group, building it into one of the country's most respected technology investment firms, known for discipline rather than publicity. He preferred it that way. Dressed in a simple charcoal suit, without expensive accessories, Daniel arrived beside his 9-year-old son, Ethan, with no assistants following behind. 4 years earlier, Daniel's wife had passed away after a brief but devastating illness. Since then, he had devoted himself to making sure Ethan never faced that loss alone. Business always mattered, but family came first. Weeks ago, Daniel had promised his son that tonight would be different. Instead of another late meeting, Ethan would witness the moment his father's company helped save thousands of jobs, a memory Daniel wanted them to share together. What made the evening unusual was how little anyone at Novatech actually knew about him. Every stage of the negotiations had been handled by his legal team, investment executives, and outside advisors. Daniel rarely attended negotiations personally, and this deal had been no exception. CEO Richard Keller had spent months negotiating with lawyers and analysts, never once meeting the man whose signature would decide his company's future. As far as Richard knew, the mysterious investor would simply appear near the end of the evening to complete the paperwork. Daniel and Ethan waited quietly near the edge of the stage for the legal team, who would meet them in 20 minutes to review the final documents. Ethan balanced a small pastry on his plate, paying far more attention to the sparkling chandeliers than the adults around him. "Dad," he asked, "why does a room need so many lights just for dinner?" Daniel smiled. "They're mostly for the cameras, not the food." For a few peaceful minutes, nothing hinted that the evening would soon leave 200 people reaching for their phones. Victoria Keller had spent 3 months planning every detail of the gala, from the seating chart to the floral arrangements. Since guests arrived, she had barely left the ballroom floor. Then she noticed Daniel and Ethan standing near the stage. A man in a plain suit. A young boy eating from a service tray. Neither matched the image she had of the invited guests. Without asking questions, she reached the wrong conclusion. She assumed Daniel was part of the catering staff, who had wandered away from his duties and brought his son along for free food. Walking over, she politely asked why he wasn't with the rest of the service crew. Daniel answered calmly, "My son and I are guests." Victoria didn't believe him. She glanced at the pastry in Ethan's hand and, with a thin smile, suggested they had slipped past security to enjoy the buffet. Ethan immediately spoke up. "My dad is here to sign an important agreement." Victoria laughed, convinced the boy was simply trying to protect his father's pride. At that moment, Richard Keller arrived, drawn by his wife's raised voice. Without asking what had happened or checking with the reception desk where the truth could have been confirmed in seconds, he sided with her immediately. Loud enough for nearby guests to hear, Richard remarked that bringing a child to work was unprofessional and reminded Daniel that staff members were not allowed inside the VIP area. A small crowd gathered. Somewhere among them, someone had already started recording. Daniel remained calm. "I'd appreciate it if you didn't speak to my son that way." His composure seemed to irritate Richard even more. Victoria picked up a glass of wine from a passing server and held it toward Daniel. "Take this to table 3, she said. "Maybe it'll remind you where you belong." Daniel didn't move. Instead, Ethan stepped in front of his father, lifted his chin, and said firmly, "My dad doesn't work for you." Richard slowly took the glass from Victoria. He glanced around the room like a man preparing for a performance. Then, without hesitation, he poured the wine down the front of Daniel's suit. Some of it splashed onto Ethan's jacket. The ballroom fell completely silent. 200 conversations stopped at once. Daniel didn't shout. He didn't move toward Richard. He calmly wiped the wine from his face, removed his jacket, and gently draped it over Ethan's shoulders before taking his son's hand. Nearby, a woman in a green gown quietly lowered her phone and whispered that security should be called on Richard, not the man he had just humiliated. No one else spoke. Daniel wasn't staying silent for the crowd. He simply refused to let Ethan see what anger might have led to. Together they walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind the stain, the silence, and 200 stunned witnesses. In the hallway, away from the noise, Ethan finally asked the question he'd been holding back. "Dad, why didn't you just tell them who you are? One sentence would have stopped everything." Daniel knelt so they were eye to eye. "Your name isn't a weapon to use in an argument," he said quietly. "I needed a clear mind before deciding what came next, not a room full of strangers watching me prove a point." His decision came quickly. Legally and financially, Daniel remained the only person authorized to approve or cancel Carter Meridian Group's $1 billion investment in Novatech. Nothing that had happened changed that. He called his general counsel and calmly gave 3 instructions. Freeze the signing immediately. Preserve every video recording and witness statement from tonight. Prepare a formal notice suspending the investment before this evening ends. This wasn't revenge disguised as business. Daniel simply refused to place his company's name behind leadership that treated people with contempt the moment they believed they had no value. Less than 10 minutes after Daniel and Ethan left the ballroom, the giant screens behind the stage flickered. The Novatech logo disappeared. In its place appeared a single sentence in bold white letters. Carter Meridian Group suspends its $1 billion investment. The room froze again. Richard stared at the screen, convinced it had to be a technical mistake. Then his legal team rushed over, holding out a phone displaying a company profile. Richard looked at the photograph, then at the name beneath it. Daniel Carter, founder and controlling shareholder of Carter Meridian Group, sole signatory with final authority over the investment. Only then did he recognize the calm man he had humiliated moments earlier. The waiter was the only person who could save or destroy his company. By then, videos from the gala were already spreading across social media. The clip everyone shared wasn't the wine. It was a 9-year-old boy stepping in front of his father to shield him from a grown man's cruelty. Only minutes earlier, Richard believed he controlled the evening. Standing beneath that screen, he realized he'd never controlled it at all. The following morning, Daniel sat in his office on the 42nd floor of Carter Meridian Group headquarters as sunlight stretched across the documents his legal team had prepared overnight. His phone overflowed with messages from people who had watched the video, but he ignored most of them. What had felt like a simple moral decision in the hallway had now become a complicated legal battle. His longtime general counsel, Diana Collins, explained the problem. The investment agreement included an exclusivity clause and a large escrow deposit. Novatech's lawyers were already preparing to argue that Carter Meridian had violated its obligation to negotiate in good faith. If they succeeded, they could pursue significant financial damages. Daniel listened quietly, turning his coffee cup in slow circles. Overnight, a question of basic decency had become a matter of contracts and legal language. He expected resistance from Novatech. What surprised him was the pushback from his own board. Two senior directors, both longtime supporters of the investment, agreed Richard's behavior had been unacceptable. But they worried about the precedent. Walking away from $1 billion investment over what the public might dismiss as a personal dispute could damage Carter Meridian's reputation for disciplined decision-making. One veteran board member, Henry Brooks, advised Daniel to document everything carefully and prove that Novatech's culture, not merely one executive's behavior, posed a genuine risk to investors. Daniel respected Henry deeply. Years earlier, Henry had defended Daniel's appointment when others doubted whether someone so private could lead a company this large. That made the warning even harder to hear. Henry wasn't questioning what had happened. He was reminding Daniel to separate conviction from strategy, the same lesson he taught him for decades. Daniel understood. But part of him wished the wine on his shirt and the fear in his son's eyes were enough. Business rarely allowed decisions that simple. He agreed to build the case properly, even though it meant a longer fight than he had ever wanted. In its place appeared a single sentence in bold white letters. Carter Meridian Group suspends its $1 billion investment. The room froze again. Richard stared at the screen, convinced it had to be a technical mistake. Then his legal team rushed over, holding out a phone displaying a company profile. Richard looked at the photograph, then at the name beneath it. Daniel Carter, founder and controlling shareholder of Carter Meridian Group, sole signatory with final authority over the investment. Only then did he recognize the calm man he had humiliated moments earlier. The waiter was the only person who could save or destroy his company. By then, videos from the gala were already spreading across social media. The clip everyone shared wasn't the wine. It was a 9-year-old boy stepping in front of his father to shield him from a grown man's cruelty. Only minutes earlier, Richard believed he controlled the evening. Standing beneath that screen, he realized he'd never controlled it at all. The following morning, Daniel sat in his office on the 42nd floor of Carter Meridian Group headquarters as sunlight stretched across the documents his legal team had prepared overnight. His phone overflowed with messages from people who had watched the video, but he ignored most of them. What had felt like a simple moral decision in the hallway had now become a complicated legal battle. His longtime general counsel, Diana Collins, explained the problem. The investment agreement included an exclusivity clause and a large escrow deposit. Novatech's lawyers were already preparing to argue that Carter Meridian had violated its obligation to negotiate in good faith. If they succeeded, they could pursue significant financial damages. Daniel listened quietly, turning his coffee cup in slow circles. Overnight, a question of basic decency had become a matter of contracts and legal language. He expected resistance from Novatech. What surprised him was the pushback from his own board. Two senior directors, both longtime supporters of the investment, agreed Richard's behavior had been unacceptable. But they worried about the precedent. Walking away from a billion-dollar investment over what the public might dismiss as a personal dispute could damage Carter Meridian's reputation for disciplined decision-making. One veteran board member, Henry Brooks, advised Daniel to document everything carefully and prove that Novatech's culture, not merely one executive's behavior, posed a genuine risk to investors. Daniel respected Henry deeply. Years earlier, Henry had defended Daniel's appointment when others doubted whether someone so private could lead a company this large. That made the warning even harder to hear. Henry wasn't questioning what had happened. He was reminding Daniel to separate conviction from strategy, the same lesson he'd taught him for decades. Daniel understood. But part of him wished the wine on his shirt and the fear in his son's eyes were enough. Business rarely allowed decisions that simple. He agreed to build the case properly, even though it meant a longer fight than he had ever wanted. That evening, Daniel sat on the edge of Ethan's bed and gently asked what had been weighing on him since the gala. Ethan had barely spoken all day. Breakfast had passed in silence, and every answer on the drive to school had been only a word or two too. Daniel recognized that silence. It was the same quiet that had settled over Ethan after his mother's death. Finally, Ethan admitted what had been haunting him. "I keep thinking, if I hadn't stepped in front of you, maybe Mr. Keller wouldn't have poured the wine." Daniel looked at him steadily. "Standing up to cruelty never causes it," he said. "The blame belongs to the person who chooses to be cruel, not to the child who refuses to leave someone he loves standing alone." Ethan didn't answer immediately, but the tension in his shoulders eased just a little. Before turning off the light, Daniel added one more thing. "Being brave sometimes comes with a cost, but that cost never belongs to the person who tells the truth." The next morning, Ethan's teacher stopped Daniel after drop-off. She explained that several students had asked Ethan about the viral video. Some were simply curious. Others repeated comments they had overheard from adults. She assured Daniel that she had reminded the class of something important. No 9-year-old should become a topic of public debate because of the actions of grown adults. Daniel thanked her for the kindness and drove to work, wondering how much of this burden his son would carry. The counterattack came quickly. Within 48 hours of the suspension becoming public, Richard hired a high-profile crisis communications firm. Novatech released a statement suggesting Daniel had intentionally hidden his identity to manufacture a public controversy and gain leverage in negotiations. They stopped short of calling it a setup. But the implications spread rapidly across financial news. Opinion writers who had never met either man began questioning why someone as wealthy as Daniel would attend the gala without introducing himself. The communication strategy wasn't designed to prove Richard innocent. It was designed to make Daniel's motives seem uncertain. Soon afterward, a heavily edited 15-second version of the gala footage appeared online. It made it look as though Daniel had forced his way into the VIP section and refused reasonable instructions to leave. Thousands of people who had never seen the full recording believed it. Some even claimed Ethan had been coached to step in front of his father for sympathy. Daniel ignored most of the comments. Unfortunately, Ethan didn't. A classmate showed him the edited clip at school. That evening, he came home carrying questions no child should have to ask. "Dad, what if everyone thinks I lied? What if none of this would have happened if I'd stayed quiet?" Daniel knelt in front of him. "You never performed for anyone," he said. "The only performance that night came from the man who poured the wine." The words comforted Ethan. But Daniel could still see doubt behind his son's eyes. 3 days later, the first real breakthrough arrived. An anonymous former Novatech employee agreed to speak with Diana under strict confidentiality. Their account was detailed and carefully documented. They described years of complaints inside Novatech's manufacturing division involving Richard's treatment of employees, many of them Black and Latino workers. According to internal records, at least 4 formal complaints had been quietly buried over 3 years. Several employees who reported misconduct had left the company shortly afterwards. One internal email advised a worker to let it go for the good of the team. The wording struck Daniel immediately. It echoed Victoria's words at the gala about knowing his place. Daniel read Diana's report twice. Until then, he had viewed the gala as one terrible incident. Now he realized it was evidence of something much larger. Simply withdrawing his investment would allow Novatech to describe everything as a misunderstanding. The people who had suffered for years would remain invisible. Daniel called Diana. "We're changing strategy," he said. "We're not just walking away. We're going to make sure the truth comes out." Diana paused. "You understand what that means?" "It means a longer legal fight. It means more public attention. It means there may be no quiet ending." Daniel answered without hesitation. "I understand." Yet another question stayed with him. Thousands of Novatech employees had done nothing wrong. Whatever happened next would affect them too. Over the following days, Daniel wrestled with that reality. He moved forward one document at a time, hoping that with enough facts, the right path would become clear. 2 days later, Carol Whitmore, the union representative for Novatech's manufacturing workers, requested a meeting. She didn't come to defend Richard. She came to speak for nearly 3,000 employees whose futures depended on the investment. If funding disappeared, layoffs would begin within months. Many workers were the sole providers for their families. Carol calmly described shift schedules, mortgage payments, and children preparing for college. She wasn't asking Daniel to forgive Richard. She was asking him not to forget the innocent people who would suffer if the company collapsed. Daniel listened carefully. "I haven't forgotten them," he replied honestly. "They're one reason I didn't cancel everything the night of the gala." After Carol left, he remained alone in his office for a long time. There were no easy answers anymore. A week later, another setback arrived. Novatech's attorneys persuaded the court to temporarily freeze the escrow account while litigation continued. The ruling didn't decide who was right. It simply prevented either side from accessing the funds until a full hearing. For the first time since the gala, Daniel no longer had complete control over his own company's money. Novatech immediately used the decision to strengthen its public narrative. At the same time, Daniel faced pressure from inside his own company. Several board members proposed that he step aside from leading negotiations until the legal dispute ended. Officially, they said the firm needed a neutral public face. Henry Brooks led the discussion. His tone remained respectful but firm. "Optics matter," he reminded Daniel. Daniel asked one quiet question. "Would you be saying the same thing if I had been the one pouring the wine instead of wearing it?" No one answered. The silence said enough. Daniel didn't fight the vote. But for the first time, he felt the ground shifting beneath him, not because of Richard Keller, but because even those on his own side hoped the entire situation would simply disappear. That evening, while looking through Ethan's closet for clothes to send to the dry cleaner, Daniel found a suit from the gala stuffed inside a plastic bag at the bottom of the trash bin. He carried it into Ethan's room. "Why did you throw it away?" he asked gently. Ethan looked down. "Every time I see it, I remember everyone staring at us, and nobody helping." After a long pause, he asked a question that had been haunting him. "Did we lose because you stayed calm? Would things have been different if you'd shouted back?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He carefully removed the suit from the bag, folded it, and placed it back in the closet. Later that night, after Ethan had gone to sleep, Daniel sat alone in his study. For the first time since the gala, doubt settled in. He no longer knew whether his own board would support a long legal battle. He no longer knew whether the truth would matter to a public already divided by edited videos and headlines. More than losing a $1 billion deal, one fear troubled him most. He worried Ethan might grow up believing that staying calm meant giving up. That was never the lesson Daniel wanted to teach. The night before the emergency hearing, an unexpected knock came at his front door. Standing outside were Richard and Victoria Keller. Neither had called ahead. Daniel considered sending them away. Instead, he stepped aside and invited them in. Without the bright lights and audience of the ballroom, Richard looked like a different man. His expensive suit could no longer hide his uncertainty. He glanced around Daniel's modest home, clearly surprised. There was no marble staircase, no extravagant artwork. Nothing matched the image he had built of a billionaire investor. Finally, Richard spoke. "I'm prepared to apologize publicly," he said. "Victoria will step down from every representative role. If you'll resume the investment, we can release a joint statement saying everything was a misunderstanding." He emphasized the thousands of employees whose jobs depended on the deal. Victoria spoke next. "I'm truly sorry," she said quietly. "We simply didn't know who you were." Daniel remained silent. Then another voice came from the hallway. It was Ethan. He had been listening. He looked directly at Richard and Victoria. "Would you still be here apologizing if my dad really had been a waiter?" The room fell silent. "If there wasn't a $1 billion deal, would you still be sorry?" Neither Richard nor Victoria answered. The silence answered for them. After several uncomfortable seconds, Victoria finally admitted, "Things would have been handled differently if we'd known." To Daniel, that was all the answer he needed. Richard tried to explain his intentions, but his words carried little weight now. Daniel realized the apology wasn't about regret. It was about fear. Fear of losing everything after discovering the man they had humiliated held the future of their company in his hands. Daniel stood. "I appreciate that you came," he said calmly. "But I can't accept an apology that only exists because of who I turned out to be, instead of how you chose to treat someone you believed had no power." He walked them to the door. Neither spoke again before leaving. Only minutes later, Diana called with news that changed everything. The anonymous employee had convinced two former co-workers to come forward. Together, they submitted sworn statements. Combined with internal emails, the evidence now revealed a documented pattern of misconduct stretching back 3 years. Diana explained that the investment agreement contained a governance clause. If Novatech had concealed systemic leadership risks, Carter Meridian could legally terminate the agreement without penalty. The evidence met that standard. Late into the night, Daniel carefully reviewed every statement. The stories matched. Names, dates, departments, complaints. Everything lined up. For the first time since the gala, he wasn't relying on emotion. He had facts. He thought about Carol Whitmore and the 3,000 workers she represented. The answer became clear. Protecting employees didn't mean protecting the executives who had failed them. It meant holding those executives accountable. The hearing took place the following morning in a courtroom far smaller than the ballroom where everything had begun. Reporters filled the back rows. Carol sat near the front beside two union representatives. Across the aisle, Richard sat with his attorneys. His confidence was gone. Diana began by presenting the complete, unedited gala footage. For the first time, the court watched every second exactly as it had happened. There was no misleading edit, no missing context. The video showed Daniel remaining calm, while Richard escalated the confrontation. Novatech's lawyers objected. The judge overruled them. "The conduct of company leadership is directly relevant to this dispute," she said. Next, Diana presented the sworn witness statements, internal emails, and years of documented complaints. She demonstrated that Novatech had failed to disclose serious governance problems during negotiations. The company had hidden a pattern of misconduct. That concealment violated the agreement. Richard's attorneys insisted the complaints were isolated personnel matters. The evidence told a different story. After reviewing everything, the judge delivered her ruling. A 3-year pattern of repeated misconduct across multiple departments could not reasonably be dismissed as isolated incidents. The governance clause existed for exactly this situation. Novatech's request was denied. Carter Meridian Group had the legal right to terminate the original agreement without penalty. Within hours, Novatech's board held an emergency meeting. By evening, Richard Keller had been removed as CEO. Victoria was stripped of every remaining representative role connected to the company. Their downfall wasn't caused by Daniel. It was caused by their own actions, once the truth finally came to light. One journalist later wrote that the most remarkable part of the entire story wasn't how 2 executives fell. It was how little effort the truth required. Once people were finally willing to see it, Daniel felt no satisfaction watching the evening news. There was no sense of victory, only quiet relief that the outcome had been decided by evidence and accountability, not revenge. With Richard gone and a new interim board in place, Daniel returned to the negotiating table. This time, the investment would move forward only under strict conditions. Diana spent the next 2 weeks negotiating every detail with the new leadership. Unlike before, both sides shared the same goal: rebuilding the company instead of protecting those who had damaged it. Carter Meridian Group agreed to complete the $1 billion investment, but only if several non-negotiable conditions were met. Richard Keller would never again hold a position within the company. The board would be completely restructured within 90 days. Every employee who had left after reporting misconduct would receive formal reinstatement offers, and any compensation they had lost. An independent reporting system would be created, answering directly to the new board rather than company management. Diana made certain every requirement was written clearly so that no future executive could quietly weaken or ignore it. The agreement also required an outside audit of personnel decisions made over the previous 3 years. It wasn't glamorous work. It wouldn't make headlines. But Daniel believed it was the most important part of the entire deal, because it was designed to protect people long after the public stopped paying attention. Another provision reserved part of the company's equity for employee ownership. Daniel insisted on it. The people who had remained loyal despite years of being ignored deserved more than a public apology. They deserved a real stake in the company's future. Daniel often thought about Carol Whitmore calmly describing workers' lives instead of making emotional appeals. He wanted the final agreement to answer those concerns. When the terms were finalized, Carol called him personally. Her voice carried a sense of relief that hadn't existed during their first meeting. She mentioned that Robert Hayes, the machine operator she had told Daniel about, had heard the news before she could even call him. After 11 years on the same production line, Robert had broken down in tears right there on the factory floor. The billion-dollar investment had become something very different from what it was on the night of the gala. It was no longer about saving Richard Keller. It was about rebuilding a company for the employees who had been failed for years. Several weeks after the restructuring was complete, Daniel returned to the Meridian Grand Ballroom. This time it was empty. The chandeliers were dim. The tables were gone. Only silence remained. Ethan came with him, curious why his father wanted to revisit the place where everything had begun. Without the crowd, the room felt smaller, less intimidating. Daniel carried a small box. He placed it on a nearby table before leading Ethan to the exact spot where Richard had poured the wine. "I wanted us to come back," Daniel said quietly. before this room became only a bad memory. Ethan looked around. It doesn't seem as scary anymore. Daniel smiled. Inside the box was the suit from that night. It had been professionally cleaned. No trace of the wine remained. Ethan recognized it immediately. I thought you would have thrown it away. Daniel shook his head. I didn't keep it to remember the humiliation. I kept it to remember the choice. The choice not to answer cruelty with more cruelty. That decision protected far more than my pride. Ethan thought for a moment. So, did you win because you had more money than Mr. Keller? Daniel smiled again. No. I won because I never let the way they treated me decide the kind of person I would become. And because, in the end, the truth was strong enough to stand on its own. Father and son walked together across the empty ballroom. They passed the place where the wine had fallen. The stage now displayed a new company banner welcoming Novatech's future leadership. As they reached the exit, Ethan glanced back one final time. This time, he didn't flinch. Outside in the afternoon sunlight, Daniel felt something lift from his heart. The frightened silence that had followed them home after the gala was finally gone. Driving away, he looked at Ethan in the rearview mirror. His son was once again quietly watching the world pass outside the window, just as he had before any of this happened. Daniel realized that, not the courtroom victory, not the billion-dollar investment, was what he had been fighting for all along. Novatech would continue making headlines for years. Some good, some difficult. But those headlines no longer belonged to him. His part of the story was finished. If this story reminded you of something worth holding on to, that's exactly why we tell them. Real dignity never needs to raise its voice to be heard. And real strength is rarely the loudest presence in the room. If Daniel and Ethan's story meant something to you, take a moment to like this video, leave a comment sharing what stayed with you most, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.